We're getting actually a really important follow-up question to that in the chats that I'd like to pose to you. Do you think children, preteens, and teenagers in the community have access to sufficient resources to addressing mental health challenges?
For our community, I don't think they do have access to some of the resources. And it goes back to what I just said, that oftentimes I know what I've seen in research that we've started to look at the Black community, because the research is just so far and wide, and there's not much study, especially here in Canada, that the Black children who are struggling in school, whether it's with anxiety already, they don't want to go to school for whatever reason because of racial discrimination, they're less likely to be referred to getting some support. If they're going to be slapped with a label like ADHD and they need medication, like, it's that extreme, but they're compared to their white counterparts, they're less likely to get support built around them. So I think there's some barriers there, or just the stigma of, just always when you can see the police system or security see a 9-year-old young man or young kid take a child, 9-year-old, but they see that person as violent and aggressive and a danger. A 9-year-old boy, or or a 10-year-old little girl, those are babies. But to the outworld, they treat them like grown people, they're not treated like children. And these are damaging and destructive. So they don't get the same care. They're put to the side or put to the back of the class, and they definitely, from what I see, don't get the same care as their white counterpart students with them.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of systemic barriers and oppressions on top of what shows up in our day-to-day lives that really impact our access to some of these services, especially for our young kids, and being treated as if they are grown adults. I'd like to open that question up to Kofi, if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share. I can pose the question to you. Do you think children, preteens, and teenagers in the community have access to sufficient resources in addressing mental health?
So no, the long and short of, the quick answer is no, because they may be offered, but again, the cultural connection, the ability to see yourself, exploring those resources or whatever the case may be, is something else, right? I've spoken to a lot of children and young people in scenarios of grief and loss. Let's just use that example, right? In our community, the amount of young people who have died due to gun violence, right? There's a narrative that's used that we speak about going to funerals. So I've been to a couple. I try not to go because they're depressing on several levels. And from a practitioner standpoint, you go and all the young people, the not to stereotype, but I'm going to explain to you my experience. They have their shades on because they don't want anyone to see their eyes, because their eyes are either red or filled with tears. They're walking around, they're in their suits, everybody looks clean, everybody looks good, but all of that is hiding what's really happening inside. And they stand around, I'm trying not to be all gloom and doom and gloom, but this is the reality. They're standing around the burial ground of their friend or what have you, and they're drinking alcohol and smoking big blunts. And all of this is to deal with the pain and the trauma of the situation. And as the adults, we're trying to support by allowing them to have their experience, because this is the last experience. Anyway, I'm saying all that to say, when all that is done and everybody goes home, those young people usually get together and continue to smoke and drink more to try to deal with the pain and the trauma of what's happening. There's no counseling happening within this. And there's no communication, there's no conversation happening between this. And when they get home to their home and they say hi to their mom or whatever, and they go to sleep and they wake up the next day with all of this still on their chest, right? And it's not being addressed and dealt with. That's just one aspect of the trauma and the issues that we're facing as a community. And they continue on, and then it's we're talking other things too, right? We're talking retaliation. We're talking, what are we doing now that this happened to our friend? And the cycle continues. All of these young people are not receiving support. The girlfriends of these young guys who, you know, everybody's walking on tiptoes, navigating these situations and circumstances, right? So to talk about counseling, to talk about going and asking for support, if it's not coming from a peer or somebody who understands that what you're going through, it's less likely to happen. So I think we need to have more like youth ambassadors, young people that are actually pro-social, that can work with their peers to actually pass on some of the knowledge that we may have, so that they can actually speak that language to them, right? This actually just came to me. So I'm glad you asked this question, because like, imagine that, right? You have your peer who knows a little bit more about these particular things because they've gone to a couple of workshops or something, that can say, you know, have you thought about this, right? Or do you realize that the anger and how you know, upset you are has to do with these traumatic incidents that are happening, and maybe you should talk to someone, right? So no, so like, so that it may be accessible, but and I even used to say this, that I used to work for an organization where we were all 9-to-5ers, but we're working with young people coming out of incarceration who have issues with the law, right? And there's statistics that say a lot of the criminal behavior that takes place between whatever 5 and 12 o'clock in the night, right? So if we're checking out work at 5 o'clock, like a lot of practitioners do, and the crime is happening between the times that you're not at work, who's supporting those young people? Right? So even the services and community has to reflect the needs of community. So even the hours of workers and individuals, you may have to get individuals that can actually be out in community and in spaces that can support beyond those hours of work. It's my 2 cents.
Amazing, amazing idea, Kofi. I think you're really highlighting the power of meeting the community where they're at and actually making that connection with the people that we want to help. I love that idea, and I'd love to see it in play if it's not already in some of our communities. Before we move on to our next question, I wanted to give EL or Megan an opportunity to share their thoughts. Would either of you like to jump in and share your thoughts on that question?
I'll wait because the next question around collective consciousness ties in well for me. So I'll wait to answer Shupri's question. We'll
Sounds good. EL, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share about that question?
What was the question? I remember, I've heard everybody talk, but just to review the question again.
Absolutely, yeah. So the question is, do you think children, preteens, and teenagers in the community have access to some of that sufficient resources for addressing their mental health?
Yeah, I'm totally behind what Kofi and Tracy just mentioned. And I think the whole system is overwhelmed, but then when you look at stuff that's culturally appropriate, then you have things that are lacking extremely in that area. So for things to be accessible, they have to be appealing in some way, shape, or form. Plus they have to be inviting for those people. And I think it was Tracy who mentioned, if the treatment of behaviors or the treatment of the functioning of Black youth is going to be punitive all the time, or at least immediately, then you're looking at a symptom versus the true illness, right? If you're always looking at the outcome, and like somebody said, maybe it was Kofi, if you're slapping things on like ADHD, or maybe it was Tracy, ADHD, yeah, okay, even that's good if you think this is the way to categorize or to describe their functioning, but what's gonna be the treatment for that? Growing up, or even now, I have a couple of family members who struggle with addiction, and often there's a story behind it. I have a very close family. So even my family, I'll go home and then I'll hear new stories that I've never known, but I've always seen things going around where relationships aren't too cool, or people aren't too kosher with other people. And there's these behaviors that I'm trying to figure out, but my family's so close because of that shame that I don't know until I have a wise one tell me, well, you know, this is what happened with your father. But so even my father with my grandma, they don't get along, and I don't understand it, but they live, or they used to live together. And then until someone said, oh yeah, during your father's 16th birthday, it all went down. I was like 35 years old. I've always seen it, but I didn't know what was going on. And nobody would talk to me when I would ask. I'm not nosy, but I'm inquisitive. So they would never tell me. And you have this stuff going on. So for 35 years, I have this situation going on in my house. They're not working it out. I don't understand it. So for people to say, yeah, well, this is to be open and this is where you can do it. I think it's so many layers with it, but I think for stuff to be accessible, it has to be that appeal, and it has to be that willingness for people to look at the illness and not the symptoms of what we see, because our behavior is everything we see, and there's functions to our behavior. I think there's like 5 main functions, and it's slipping me now, but there's reasons why we do what we do. And if we can help understand or help try to figure out what's going on at home, or what's their perception, what's their self-concept, maybe what's the racism they're dealing with, then we can say, okay, this would be a better way versus sending them home, or this is a better way of chastising them in front of everybody. Let's see if we can build a relationship to then allow them to open up. And that trust, that's a marathon. It's not going to be a 2-day, I don't trust you, and then in 2 days, I do trust you. It's a marathon. You're supposed to invest and try to open up that conversation to build that type of relationship. So then you say, okay, now let's really get down to some of these things that brought you here.
You're really, really speaking on the power of communication, and how that in and of itself really helps support building that trust, not only, with the systems outside of our homes, but even how that reflects in our family lives and what communication and relationship looks like, and then adding in that layer of mental health and being part of the ACB community. It's all interlinked, as you were sharing earlier.